Okay, guys. Little bit of a different format today. I had some stuff pop up over the weekend, so hopefully you read the email, and kind of explaining it. But we're gonna change things up this week a little bit, and there might be a couple more weeks in the near future that we do this. But for the most part, the same thing, just not truly live. Like I said, I've got some stuff coming up that I got to handle today. So I figured I might as well, instead of skipping it, might as well just keep pushing through the material, get our lecture in. You'll still have your assignment, which I'll give you in a little bit. And obviously you have your assignment on Wednesday. And we just kind of keep moving along. So I'm going to get right into it. If you can, open up Canvas to your pages section and click on the page that says FIT, F-I-T-T, FIT. I'm gonna do my best to make this as brief as possible and just kind of get right to the meat and potatoes of what I'm talking about. Give you your assignment. There's obviously no interaction in this format, but regardless, we got to get through it. Okay, so FIT. Last week we talked about, just in general, what are some of the basic principles of just maintaining good fitness, maintaining lifelong, managing your weight lifelong. Some of the kind of general principles on how we should eat. How we should exercise, what types of exercise that we should focus on. Now, what FIT does, FIT's an acronym that stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type. Now, this kind of does two things. Number one, it's a skeleton for which you can build a fitness program on or around. It's sort of a blueprint. But more specifically, it's a consideration. It's how do we format, how do we come up with, how do we apply all of these various principles we know about fitness and weight management and strength and conditioning. How do we put it in a easily consumable, easily implemented format, right? More importantly, these incorporate, if that's the right word, incorporate the knowledge that we have learned in the last 20, 30 years about strength and conditioning, about physiology, the body, how we recover, the role that rest plays, the role that strength conditioning plays, the role that cardio conditioning plays, all of these things, right? So it's kind of the umbrella at the starting point of a good, well-rounded, lifelong weight management program. Okay, and frankly, this is used for anybody trying to increase or decrease anything physically. In other words, if you're trying to throw the ball harder, you're trying to run faster, you're trying to even lose weight, you're trying to decrease your mileage time, your mile time, right? These are all, it kind of handles everything, if that makes sense. So with that said, frequency stands for essentially the number of times per week that the average person is going to train. Now, obviously, there's some high level athletes out there where frequency is times per day. Athletes, Olympic athletes, MMA fighters, UFC fighters, boxers. A guy like Michael Phelps, Olympic swimmer. He would have multiple conditioning sessions during the week, two, 3 times a day. Right. But for most of us living normal adult lives in the United States, we're going to get to the gym, at most once a day during the week. It's rarely more than that for most people. So frequency refers to the number of times per week that you're going to be working out or conditioning or strength training or whatever it is. Okay. So intensity is kind of a loaded word, but when you're talking to someone in like the strength and conditioning field, when you're talking about intensity, you're really referring to two things. You're referring to load and you're referring to volume. Now, the type of exercise you do can affect intensity. How fast or the time in which you confine your exercise or confine your workout routine can have an effect on intensity. But don't get it confused when we're talking about FIT, specifically the acronym FIT, and specifically the I in FIT, which is intensity. Okay, so these two considerations for intensity, load and volume, are really fancy words for weight and reps, or sets and reps, right? Reps and sets. In other words, in referring to intensity, you can do a couple of things. Either you can increase your weight, right? Or you can increase your reps. Now, for the most part, we have an inverse relationship with these things. In other words, as one goes up, the other one goes down, and vice versa. So if we're talking about load, if we're talking about weight, as the amount of weight that you lift increases, the number of reps will decrease. Why? Because you're working at your max. As you get to 80 or 70, 80, 90% of your max, you're just going to be able to do fewer reps. And that's okay. That's a form of intensity, which we'll talk about later. That, for the most part, will help with hypertrophy, with an enlarging of the muscles, right? So you see a lot of power and performance athletes at times throughout the year, depending on what they're doing, if they're in season or not. Going through cycles where they're lifting very heavy, so the load is very high. In other words, the weight is really high, but the volume is really low, or the sets or the reps are very low. Perfect way to implement strength training, especially in someone who is training year round. I mean, that's not a way you can lift year round, but definitely a part of any good conditioning program. Intensity can also be can be upped or can be shifted by lowering your load and increasing the number of reps or increasing the number of sets. So again, there's that inverse relationship. So as you get lower or farther away from your max, in other words, let's say 100 pounds is your max bench press, okay? As you get to 60, 50, 40 pounds on bench press, to have any type of metabolic disturbance, to have any type of effect on your muscles, you're going to want to increase the reps, right? This typically has a more slimming effect or cutting effect. But also, just as much as lifting heavy, high volume type stuff also has its role in overall conditioning and strength and training, right? We'll talk about that a little bit more next week when we start talking about numbers and what that really means. But for the most part, all I need you to understand is this right now. Intensity, specifically when we're talking about FIT, intensity refers to the inverse relationship between load and volume. Okay, so as your load increases, as you lift closer to your max, your volume is going to go down. Or to change intensity and to change your routine, you can flip that. You can lower your load, but you're going to want to increase the number of reps, right? And or possibly even the number of sets that you're doing in that workout. Okay. So when you think intensity, think inverse relationship, load and volume, okay? Weight and reps. Okay, so the first T, time. Time plays a significant role in a couple of things, but plays a significant role overall in your fitness. First and foremost, time plays a role as far as rest. In other words, how much time do you have between not only your sets and and your exercises when you're working out, but how much time are you giving yourself between actual workouts, like actually walking or going into the gym and going into workout? For the most part, rest and recovery are probably underrated by most people. In other words, most people are following just a skeleton plan on, well, you know, the American Heart Association says I need to go 3 times a week for 30 minutes, or, you know, whatever governing body is out there giving recommendations on how much you should strength train or how much you should condition. Those are things defined by your goals, right? Another thing that we'll talk about later, but time plays a significant role in that. Rest is incredibly, incredibly important. So the idea that, you know, you lift one day and you take another day off, then you lift the next day, that should be varied, just like your exercises should be varied. In other words, there's going to be times where you're going to have active rest periods. You're going to gain more rest or get more rest, focus on resting a little bit more. And there's going to be other times in a conditioning program where you fatigue yourself a little bit more, where you deprive yourself of a little bit of rest to make some gains, right? Time between sets, you know, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here because, again, it depends on how you're lifting. If you're lifting really heavy, you're going to have more time between sets. But with that said, many people go to the gym and they waste time. In other words, it's not uncommon to see, you know, a couple guys working out together, a couple high school dudes working out together, you know, maybe do some bench press, and then they go get some protein, you know, muscle milk up at the counter, or, you know, they look in the mirror, they're kind of hanging out talking, then they do some curls. And if you put a stopwatch on that type of lifting, you'll find out that you're in the gym for an hour and a half and you've only done 20 minutes of actual lifting, right? Or 20 minutes of actual work. For most people, I would think, you know, in general, just watching people work out as I work out, I would think that most people could take all the things they want to do. So let's say you did push-ups and pull-ups and squats and lunges and curls. I mean, if you took the 8 to 10 exercises that you did at the gym that morning, and it took you an hour and a half, if you condense that into an hour, or better yet, condense it into under an hour, maybe 45 to 50 minutes, you would definitely feel your heart rate up, right? You would doing the same amount of work in a shorter amount of time. Again, but as I mentioned before, will affect intensity. It will make things a little bit more challenging. So time plays a significant role, and it's just something that you just kind of have to fiddle with the more and more you condition. Okay, so lastly, type. Conditioning is functional, right? Strength should be functional, flexibility, functional, range of motion, functional. And this is one of the reasons why I argued for strength conditioning over cardio conditioning, especially for people at your age. Having range of motion, having good blood flow, being able to lift things up and over your head, being able to bend down and pick things up, those are important. That type of functional strength is what allows for the most part, for longevity. I mean, for the most part, if you remain strong and flexible, and you work the range of motion in your hips and in your legs and in your joints, you will avoid injury a lot better than a lot of people who live a more sedentary lifestyle. So what does this mean? This means, honestly, less machines when you're at the gym and more time on the floor. In other words, most of your lifts should be compound lifts. In other words, you're working more than one lever. Like, what do I mean by lever? Your ankles, your knees, your hips, those are all, your body's levers, right? They're hinges. They're going to open and close. You should be doing compound exercises. In other words, working more than one hinge. So like a walking lunge, a prisoner squat with a dumbbell press overhead, things of that nature. Another compound lift is a push-up. You are isometrically stabilizing your body, yet you're going through the range of motion for the push-up itself. Those are all highly functional exercises that prepare you for, bending over and picking something up or being off balance. I mean, I coach for years, and I hear guys say, and I'm going to have to move this to show you this, but I hear guys say so many times, I mean, how many times did you hear a coach say, this is an athletic stance? When the fact of the matter is, there are very few times in a game where you're like this. I mean, just watch a volleyball game. You're constantly here. You're constantly here. Baseball, the same thing. Tennis, football. How many times you go to grab a guy and you're off balance? There are very few times. There are very few times when you're balanced. When you're in this perfect athletic stance. I mean, even as guys hit, they technically get out of balance, right? They come off of one foot. Many hitters, you'll see, just watch the World Series. As they swing, as they finish their swing, you see that back foot actually come off the ground, right? So the idea that everything is balanced and that, that the idea of that athletic stance it doesn't always applicably make the most sense. In other words, watch what athleticism is. Athleticism typically is people doing phenomenal things out of balance, right? Again, feats of strength that we talked about. We talked about that last week. So functional exercises, functional stretching, which we'll talk about again in our next lecture, have a tendency to be exercises that are more core engaging. Very few exercises of laying down and bench pressing, sitting on a stationary bike, things of that nature. Sitting on an assisted row where you're seated down and you have your chest on a pad and all you got to do is pull back. Again, as I mentioned in the past, the best exercise is the exercise you're willing to do. However, a bent row, right, where your feet are on the ground, you're stabilizing your body, you're stabilizing your core, and you're pulling up either a barbell or a dumbbell to your chest, it has significant more benefit than the machine row where your core is not engaged, right? So functional exercise, compound exercise, feet on the floor, not sitting on a machine, is always the best, right? Is definitely has more physiological benefits. Okay. So with that said, frequency, intensity, time, type, the acronym FIT, frequency, how many times a week you hit in the gym, intensity, the inverse relationship between load and volume. As your weight or your load increases, your volume, the number of reps is going to decrease, or vice versa. Time between sets, time between weightlifting sessions or gym sessions. And then finally, type, right? What type of exercises are you doing? Push-pull, posterior, anterior type work. All of that we'll talk about a little bit more, but for the most part, your lifting should be functional. It should be incorporating more than one lever. It should be incorporating your core, incorporating your legs. Those are your largest muscles. Working those and taking those through their range of motion provide the most immediate benefits, right? The most immediate benefits. Okay, your assignment, your lecture assignment today is I want you to look up the concept of periodization. Okay. Periodization. Periodization is a concept used in strength and training. And I'm just going to stop right there. I want you to Google periodization and I want you to tell me what definition you got from that. Okay, that's the assignment for today. Look in Canvas for your Wednesday assignment, and I will see you live again next week. See ya.